Welcome to State of Mind. Being human and living well.
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 I'm Deborah Sloss, the producer and usual host, and a licensed marriage and family therapist, and my pronouns are she, her. Men and therapy, two words that for a long time rarely went together, but that's changing. More men are stepping into therapy, challenging outdated stigmas and redefining what strength really means. For generations, men have been told to man up, to face struggles alone, suppress emotions, and avoid vulnerability. But mental health doesn't work that way. Therapy isn't just for crises. It's a powerful tool for self-awareness, personal growth, and deeper relationships. In this episode, originally recorded in 2023, we're joined by three men who've taken the courageous step into therapy, each with their own unique journey, and a male therapist who's worked with countless men navigating this path to healing. To guide today's conversation, psychotherapist Lisa Herendeen is going to be your guest host. At the time of this interview, Lisa was a valued member of the State of Mind team and a private practice therapist in Santa Cruz, California, specializing in family systems. She has a particular passion for working with male clients and would love to see more men utilizing therapy. Lisa's also a writer, and it was her interest in this topic that inspired this episode. With that, I'll turn it over to Lisa. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Deborah. People are utilizing therapy now more than ever before, including more men. So we want to take a look at what therapy is like for men, the barriers, the benefits, and the type of therapy available. I'm excited about the guests we have with us today. I'll be talking with Tim Hartnett, a longtime marriage and family therapist here in Santa Cruz, specializing in men's groups and couples counseling. He's the director of Shine a Light Counseling Center, which provides sliding fee counseling to people who might otherwise not be able to afford therapy. Tim oversees the training and supervision of 60 therapists at his agency. Also here to share his perspective on being in therapy is Joseph Joey Fino, age 43. Therapy was something that he never thought he would need until a debilitating chronic illness had a profound impact on his physical well-being. He lost the ability to do many of the things that he loved in life, and so he sought out therapy as a way to start helping him live his life completely differently. Once in therapy, he realized that it was proving incredibly helpful for other areas in his life as well. And we also have Mark Vanderhoof. Mark grew up in an insulated environment with a family of 4 sisters and no brothers. He found out as a teenager that money, girlfriends, social status, etc. were not adequate for his soul. Lost and lonely and sometimes aggressive, at age 19, he found Jesus and was able to start feeling more alive and active. Fast forward to married life, he and his wife found himself in both marriage counseling and individual counseling. Subsequently, through counseling and a prayer approach, he has found much healing, hope, renewed joy, and engagement in life. Welcome, Tim, Mark, and Joey.
Hi, Lisa. Good to be here.
Hello, Lisa and all. Nice to make a contribution. I'm Mark.
Hello, Lisa. It's good to be here.
I'm going to start with Tim Hartnett. When we talk about men in therapy, what are we talking about? What types of therapy and how do they work?
Well, there's individual therapy, couples therapy, group therapy. Those are the main 3 that a man might be involved in. And they each kind of have different focuses. In individual therapy, a man would go because they want to get a better relationship with themselves. They want to be more self-aware, maybe examine the choices in their lives, maybe improve their mood, and maybe work out some of the stuck feelings from childhood. That you need some real intensive individual focus to address. In couples therapy, of course, it would be more relationship focused, and you'd be working on communication skills, how to bond and have intimacy in an ongoing relationship, how to make that bond stable and get from it what you want. And then in group therapy, it's a little more like you're coming specifically to work with other men on the ways that the male role has affected you. I mean, you might have just get general support in a men's group too, but the advantage of it being all men is that you can together look at something that you've all experienced, which is how the society raises men, and begin to unpack what parts of that work for you and what parts don't work for you, and how could you change that?
Thanks. What's exciting about these times with regard to men in therapy?
Well, the times have been changing. We've been looking at how gender roles affect people for a long time. Now, I was raised in a feminist household, and so I've been thinking about gender for a long time. And I think some of that work has been, most of that work has been really good. And a recent development in it being the Me Too movement, which very important, and it adds on to the large body of understanding about how people acting out in the male role have caused a lot of harm to other people. But I don't think we're quite where we want to get to be in terms of understanding how the male role hurts men themselves. And that's something that men need to come together in men's groups or go in therapy so that they become more articulate in understanding just what their own experiences is and how they are also victims as well as perpetrators in this world of defined roles and the oppressions that these roles play a part in.
Yeah, that's really good and interesting. As a family therapist, I see that you work with groups, but if I see it also in what you're saying in couples and in family systems.
Sure.
I'm going to turn to Mark. Mark, how did you first get started in therapy, and what kind of therapy was it? And what motivated you?
It started in marriage therapy uh, in the mid 90s. Being a Christian, I went to a Christian therapy association in Aptos called Relational Resources. And my wife and I were, it's been a while now, trying to remember what was going on, but my wife and I were, we were having problems. We'd been married since 1978, so we were over 15, almost 20 years of marriage. And we had children that were in elementary, middle school, and things started coming up for us that were triggering things that happened to us when we were those ages, especially with my oldest daughter. We have two daughters, and so I thought I came from a perfect family, so to speak, and my wife, she would readily admit I didn't come from a perfect family. She came from a family where her father was had a lot of triggers growing up in poverty and being in combat in World War II, and he had a lot of trauma in his life that kept coming up, and he was very authoritarian. And so I thought it was all her family, and then come to find out, I realized that in our marriage we had created a system ourselves of aberrations, of dysfunctions, what have you, that that perpetuated these triggers, actually. And that was a real light for me to come on, was that, oh, I had a contribution to this. I just couldn't blame her dad.
Thanks, Mark. It is very typical as you become parents, the past starts coming up. What was your first experience like, and how did it take you further? Because I know you've been on this path a long time.
My first experience was this is about Janet's father. My wife's name is Janet, and her mother's complicity, being the quiet behind the scenes, ideal homemaker mother. So then I began to realize that in my family, we didn't do conflict at all. We didn't know how to do conflict in my family. We were the ideal family, and we never had conflict. So when our counselor said, "Oh, in your family, the walls were shaking, but you guys were just busy keeping the mirrors and the pictures straight so they wouldn't look out of place." So that was like, oh yeah, so the light started coming on for me there. And then I started to realize that my wife and I, we had the same goal. We wanted to have a good relationship. We truly love one another. We truly feel called to be together. We were taking different paths up to the mountaintop. And realizing that we had the same goal was actually a turning point in our therapy.
That's wonderful, Mark. People start to make progress, couples, when they own that they are creating patterns, when they're not finger pointing. So that's really wonderful. Well, how has it helped you? You know, you gave us a nice description of therapy, but how has it helped you in your life with your family and even in your professional life?
My spiritual life is very important to me and to my life and to my wife. We bonded together over spiritual matters, talking, praying, just and we still do. We're musicians. We do a lot of music together and individually in worship music, mostly. So as I was going along and realizing that my family was not an ideal family after all, I realized that I had been tripped up along the way, especially in 3 different areas of my life. One, I was sexually abused by a neighbor boy when I was about 7 years old, and the boy was maybe 14, several times. Unfortunately, my family moved away when I turned 8 because my 4th sister was born and we needed a bigger house. And then through prayer, I realized that Christ was right between me and that perpetrator, and it was saying, stop, no more. And I still have a vision that I carry with me of this living Jesus being there, halting that whole thing and healing me and holding me, and him being sad in that situation too. And reframing my life, not that it didn't happen, but just reframing me. The second thing had to do with trying to be an overachiever as a young adult, being in Boy Scouts, trying to get good grades, trying to work my way into favor and to happiness in my life, and realizing that wasn't going to fulfill my soul. The third thing, and probably the most prominent experience of my life, was being dumped by a girlfriend when I was 16. My parents had grown up next door to each other. They were a couple since they were elementary students. My parents had this ideal that, hey, you fall in love and you marry somebody, you know? And so suddenly one day this girl dumped me out of the blue. So I realized I had fear of sudden abandonment.
Wow.
And this came out in counseling. That the counselor we were seeing at Relational Resources said, let's look at this sudden abandonment. Because I was feeling that Janet was going to suddenly abandon me in the 90s because she was feeling distance from me because I wasn't accepting her in in the things she was going through. And so then I was starting to preempt our relationship and think, okay, she's going to dump me.
Yeah, and put walls up.
Right. So I was getting triggered by a past experience in the present. So in a manual prayer that I do, they talk about, is your past invading your present? And that's as a Christian, that's what I'm active in that. I've been trained as a prayer counselor to help someone experience the living, active presence of Jesus today, to go into my past, because as God, he is transcending time, matter, space. And a memory is a present event in my life. And so I need this present divine figure to go there with me, who has a face, who's human yet God, and to hold me, to comfort me, to be sad with me, to reframe it, to remind me of things, so that wounds and lies get corrected in my soul and in my conscious mind. Then that's something I can take with me, and I take it with me every day.
Thank you, Mark. This, you really gave us a really beautiful picture of how you've dealt with terrible trauma and not just suppressed it and found ways of healing. And one of the things I'm noticing is one way of healing, or one avenue into therapy for you, has been your spirituality.
Correct. Yeah.
And so that's great that we're going to get to bring that up. I want to turn to Joey. Joey, I understand your avenue is different. You experienced a medical crisis, and that's what brought you into therapy. Can you talk a little about that?
Sure. So I was a rock climber and I had an injury, and it wasn't some crazy fall or anything, but I felt something in my back. And, I just kind of kept living my life and using pain as my guide, which it turns out I have a high pain tolerance. So I was trying to bartend, go to school for EMT, and just live my life. And I had a genetic condition as well too that I didn't know about that affects my ligaments and tendons. So my ligaments and tendons were being weakened this entire time. So I went from being a very, very physical person, having that play a really prominent role in my life, rock climbing, biking around the city, hiking up mountains. And then in 8 months, I was mostly bedbound and horizontal and wondering what happened. And so there was just a lot of questions, and I wasn't getting a lot of answers within the medical community. I was jumping from doctor to doctor to try and figure things out, and nothing was really making sense at that time. And during that 8-month period, my depression just started going up. The more physical ability I lost, the higher my depression went. And it all just kind of came to a head. And basically, I was going to do anything that I could to try and figure things out. And therapy came up. And I just kind of jumped at it right away, because I knew, as much as my body was affecting my mental state, I knew my mental state was going to affect my body too. So I needed to get it under control. And so jumped into therapy.
That's fantastic that you found therapy that helpful. Tim, do you have some reflection on what our two guests have said?
Sure. I'm struck with the degree of self-reflection that you've been able to go through, that therapy's helped you, that you both kind of faced life unfolding supposedly in the correct picture of how we want our lives to look, and you both had to deal with situations that then made that picture crumble, and had to reflect on, okay, so then how am I going to adjust? I can't just keep trying to make everything look like it should. I have to really deal with what is happening and how I'm going to respond to it. And I'm just really pleased that both of you used the help that you got about doing that so well.
And do you find that's typical for people who come into men who especially who come into therapy? That something in the script has drastically shifted?
You're listening to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm the producer, Deborah Sloss, and today we're exploring men in therapy, why more men are seeking therapy, the challenges they face, and the life-changing benefits it can bring. Every State of Mind episode comes with a resource list, and any we talk about today can be found at www.stateofmindmedia.org. Today's conversation is led by guest host Lisa Herendeen, a psychotherapist passionate about supporting men in therapy. She's joined by psychotherapist Tim Hartnett, an expert in men's groups, along with guests Joey Fino and Mark Vanderhoof, who open up about their personal experiences. And later we'll hear from Daniel as he reflects on how therapy has helped shape his journey. Back to our interview.
So, Tim, do you find that's typical for people who come into men who especially who come into therapy? That something in the script has drastically shifted?
Well, it's true for human beings, and men are human beings first. So a lot of the experience of a man in therapy is general to human beings in therapy. But there are particular ways that men get taught what their lives are supposed to look like. Robert Bly was a poet, big in the men's movement back in the 80s and 90s. He used to say, men grow up thinking that life is going to be one victory after another. That's a successful life. And he said, it's just not going to be that. And that's not what you can base your worth on. In fact, it might be more appropriate to consider that there's value in failing at nobler and nobler battles throughout the course of your life.
Can you tell us more about what keeps men from going into therapy?
Well, there's the legacy of therapy being something that you do only if there is something wrong with you. And then the male socialization that you in anything that might be wrong with you could be a vulnerability that would be exploited, and you'd be victimized for not being strong enough, not being tough enough, not being self-sufficient enough. So there's a vulnerability that you have to get to say, I could use some help. I can't just do it all on my own, as well as I might be able to do it with somebody else's help. And therapy can help you get to that vulnerability, because that vulnerability is useful in life and in relationships. But if you've never been in therapy before, you might not have enough experiences with talking to people and having it actually help you for you to then decide to seek that out. Because that's not really the experience we offer boys as they're growing up that much. We tell them what they need to do to progress in the world. We don't offer to listen to them and respond to their emotions in ways that therapy does. So a lot of people just don't really have, and men in particular, don't have the lived experience of how valuable it can be to talk to somebody who's willing to give you their full attention and really validate and understand the things that you're trying to tell them.
Good. So one of them is just they're not familiar with it. That's a good point.
Yeah. And then in I could say also in couples therapy, sometimes men have to get dragged into couples therapy because they're wary of engaging in something that they're not already good at. I know my dad got dragged into therapy by my sister, into a family therapy session, and sure enough, in the first 5 minutes, the question that he was terrified of popped up. The therapist asked him how he felt, and that was his worst nightmare.
You bring up a good point. Not feeling good at something is very uncomfortable. And if you haven't been trained and you get dragged into therapy and have to feel like I'm not going to be good at this. And I've even had couples where there's a little competitiveness, like she's good at it, I'm not. And
I mean, some guys going into couples therapy, particularly with a woman therapist, are afraid that, oh, this is just going to be two women criticizing me now instead of one, that they'll be on the same team because they have the same kind of experience, and so they're reticent to enter that situation.
yeah, and they've got those skills. I've even got a couple where, one of the wife is a therapist. He's like, oh, two therapists ganging up on me, and he's an engineer. So yeah, so it is a skill set. Let's go back to Joey. Joey, how has therapy helped you in your life in general?
A lot of the things Tim is saying is resonating with me about getting into therapy, not really knowing what to even say. And also, prior to everything that happened to me, I don't think I would have gone into therapy because, again, nothing major was really going on with me. My life was pretty good overall. I had a good social structure. I had things that I really loved to do. Family was good. So there wasn't any real reasons. But now looking back on it, I can see how useful it would have been, especially in relationships. Because I feel like whenever I get intertwined with somebody, I love it. It's so much fun being that close to somebody. But there's a lot that happens, and there's a lot of nuance to a relationship. And you can't always ask your friends to talk in depth about this all the time, just for time's sake. Everybody's busy these days. So it's something that I realized looking back would have been incredibly helpful. Personal relationships just with my friends it's made things a lot easier, because one of the things when you have a chronic debilitating illness, it's just kind of always there, and it's easy to get lost in that, where it encompasses everything in your life. And so it's easy to talk about it with your friends all the time because they're your friends. But at the same time, I didn't want to put that all on them all the time. I wanted to be able to enjoy my time with them, have fun with them, see what's going on with them, and just, yeah, keep it a little bit separate. I want to be honest with them about what's going on with my life, but I don't want it to overwhelm our relationship. And so I use therapy in that sense as an enormous outlet to get some of this stuff off my chest about what's going on with me and how it's affecting my mental state. There's a lot of isolation that happens with chronic illness, and just the puzzle of trying to figure out what's going on with me, dealing with doctors and all that stuff. So there's just so much going on that, like, having somebody to be there on a week to week basis that's there for me was so important. They were interested in what's going on in my life, and their focus was on me, which that's really hard to have, especially with my position of being isolated. I can't just go meet up with friends, on a whim. There's all these blocks. It's like, well, how far is it? How much am I going to be walking? Are the chairs going to be comfortable? There's all these things that I have to think about now that I never used to think about. And so, yeah, it's just nice having somebody there in a comfortable room, one-on-one, to be able to express all of these things.
That's good. Mark, can we go to you? You want to resonate with any of the things that Tim and Joey have said? And my other question is kind of similar. How has it affected your relationships, your wife, your kids, your professional life?
I'm retired now, and I retired a year ago, but I had a laundromat in Scotts Valley for 21 years, and I was kind of a shopkeeper there. I did my own repairs, and I was there quite a bit. And before that, I was a commercial real estate manager and dealing with big numbers and big people. But then in the laundromat, all people wanted to do was get clean laundry. And I realized that that relationship, it was such a more low-key but important relationship that I got to know people, because I was ready to just go out of the business world. Actually, I wanted to be a therapist. But it was too late for that. I was like 48 years old. So I realized that emotional intelligence is super important, and I'm really bummed out about my gender, because in general, men are emotional infants. We are at the infant level. I got involved with an organization that talked about 19 brain skills of a mature person. And I realized that most men are at the infant level, and we fall apart so easily. And I read this book years ago by Terrence Real called I Don't Want to Talk About It. And the book, I Don't Want to Talk About It, is I don't want to talk about how depressed I am or how my emotions are, but I am so depressed, but I can't talk about it. The only emotion that men are allowed to express is anger. And I thought, oh man, that was just a bullseye, and on my heart. And I realized, gosh, I felt like I was being programmed by the culture toward that. And so reading that book back in the 90s was very helpful and very revolutionary for me. Because now, like for instance, yesterday I was at a reunion, a Christmas luncheon reunion with people I knew in high school. It was an all men's meeting of about 20 guys. And I realized I really care about these guys, but all they're talking about is superficial, funny things, their achievements. Sometimes when us men get together, we have a bragging contest.
Has therapy helped you penetrate that and be able to relate to them better?
It has. It has a little bit, but most of my friends will not touch therapy with a 10-foot pole. They have to be in dire straits. They have to be, this is kind of my theory, is men have to be in a terrible situation before they will seek therapy. Just terrible. And women much more readily go into therapy. Like it's like 90 versus 10,
Yeah, that does tend to be true. But I want to mention the ways that the culture condones men getting together don't necessarily build real, authentic, honest relationships between men, which is what the beauty of a men's group is, because it takes this actual potential of, you guys have all been through a similar experience that has set you up for a lot of difficulty in life, this male socialization. And instead of just act out the roles that we learned with each other, what if we tried to actually change the rules in a group together, consciously saying, we don't want to do with each other what we got taught to do. Let's create a whole different culture. And in a group of men, that can happen in a very powerful way. When somebody opens up and starts to be real about their feelings, it immediately helps everyone else in the group realize, oh, this is a place I could do that. And the rules start to change, and a healing that can be very profound can happen there.
Does that happen then with really formally sitting down and saying, okay, guys, here's the rules we've been living by. Now we're going to adopt a new constitution here. I mean, you almost have to do that. Like, here's the 10 things we've been doing. Now here's the 10 things we want to do, for instance.
Certainly there's, it helps to reflect on, and somebody can raise some points, but it still does take courage to go ahead and step out and be the one who starts to be more real. And and what I found is that usually there is somebody in every group who's willing to do that. And once somebody starts to do that, people just naturally see the value of that and start to go, I want to be able to do that too.
Mm-hmm. That's something that I've seen in my friendships. An example of that would be a good friend of mine. He really can open up to me, and he has this ease about him. And it's one of those things where I always thought that he did that with everybody because it felt so easy to him. And then just recently we were talking about that, how we can talk on a number of different levels and really dig in with each other. And he was like, "Oh, I only do this with you." And I realized, like, oh, okay, that, everything kind of became clear that you really have to find that person or two that you can really dig in with. And it's hard to find at first. Sometimes you have to just test the waters and then see where it goes. And if they start opening up, then you can kind of just build off of that and go from there.
And sometimes a therapist plays that role. You can't find that in your life, but you can find that with a therapist, and you get used to being able to talk like that. And then you bring it out of the therapy room and you start to create those kinds of helpful peer relationships that you've learned how to do from your relationship with your therapist.
Yay. Like you guys could start a revolution this way. It makes me sad, but women have this too. That we can't always find people who will go deeper with us. So, Tim, I want to go back to you. How have you seen men's participation in therapy change over the last 30 years that you've been working professionally with a focus on men?
Well, there's two different focuses uh, that come up, and I'm going to speak mostly with about the men's group experience because that's where the male socialization dynamics come to the fore the most. And there are some men who are still needing to learn that the role that they've learned is undermining them in their life. It's not supporting them having a close, attuned relationship with their children. It's not supporting them to know how to have real intimacy with their partner. And it's not supporting them to even have a good relationship with themselves where they're not constantly comparing or their value to other men who are more materially successful. So all those things of unlearning the the unfortunate lessons of male socialization are valuable. But more and more recently, as younger men in particular have grown up in a culture where they've learned a lot about how damaged people have been by men acting out the male role. That a lot of young men come into therapy with a lot of shame about being a man.
You've been listening to State of Mind, Being Human and Living Well. I'm the producer and usual host, Deborah Sloss. Today, we're talking about men in therapy, how more men are stepping into the therapy room, challenging outdated stigmas, and discovering how counseling can be a powerful tool for growth, resilience, and healthier relationships. Leading today's conversation is guest host Lisa Herendeen, a psychotherapist passionate about helping men access support and develop emotional awareness. Lisa is joined by Tim Hartnett, a therapist specializing in men's groups, along with guests Joey Fino and Mark Vanderhoof, who share their personal journeys of self-discovery through therapy. Later, we'll also hear from Daniel, who reflects on the guidance he's found through his own therapeutic process. Now, let's get back to our interview.
Younger men in particular have grown up in a culture where they've learned a lot about how damaged people have been by men acting out the male role. That a lot of young men come into therapy with a lot of shame about being a man. they've been criticized and they've taken it to heart, and they just feel awful about themselves, and anything masculine uh, becomes something that they shy away from, and it's very disempowering, and it doesn't actually help anyone for them to just crawl under a rock and be sorry that they ever existed. So it's another thing that we're seeing more and more, that we need to help, particularly younger men, but not necessarily only younger men, um, come to realize that who they are is still of great value, even if there is some work to do in shedding some of the things that the role has inculcated in them.
I think that's a really good point. I have a son who hates that word male toxicity with good reason. And he's like, we don't talk about female toxicity. Joey, let's come back to you. If you had a friend or a colleague you were concerned about, how would you approach them about getting help, either from therapy or otherwise?
It would really depend on the person, but overall, I would try and talk to them one-on-one. So there's just more pressure when there's other people around. So having a one-on-one conversation, I think, would be really important. And I would give my own personal experiences, and especially if they were relatable to their situation, and be able to use my experiences so that they can see how the outcome might be, how their life might be improved by therapy. I would try and use all of those things. And then if they don't ask any questions, or if they seem hesitant, I would kind of back off right off the bat, because maybe they're not quite ready for that. And sometimes they need to like think about it a little bit, and then maybe go back to it a little bit later and asking them again, well, what would you think about that? And if they express interest, then keep moving along, about how to get therapy and other things like that.
So, Tim, besides competition like sports, um, and besides individual group or couples therapy, can you think of any other ways men can develop these skills, connect, do the kinds of things we're talking about?
Well, I think all social activities can be really beneficial for human beings, and men may shy away from some of them, um, when in fact they could feel a lot happier and thrive in their lives more if they participated. Therapy is kind of an intense one, but there are other ways to connect to ACA groups, 12-step groups. That's adult children of alcoholics, if you fit in that category. There's peer-led men's groups. There's also just activities like singing and dancing, activities that to join, there's a social awkwardness that you have to get over. And if you're really stuck in a kind of stiff male role and awkward with social situations, you may shy away from them. When if you can get over that hurdle and really start to value what it is to connect with other people, you start to realize that you can actually thrive and be a lot happier in life than you have been in isolation.
Okay. So I'm going to do a follow-up question, Tim, because there's a, kind of idea, or it seems to be a fact, that men in their late 40s and 50s tend to have and report higher rates of loneliness. And why is this? And how could therapy or some of the things you just talked about help change that trend?
Yeah, yeah. Loneliness is big, and it's not so often identified as such, as I spoke about earlier. But to have the vulnerability to realize I need other people, I need connection, and then to realize, and the way I've been raised has not encouraged me to focus on what I need to learn about how to connect with people to make that happen. So I could just grow old and isolated and unhappy, or I could take matters into my own hands and go, I want to develop this in myself. I want to learn how to respond to people in ways that make them really glad to be my friend, and how to disclose myself to people in ways that make them go, oh, wow, I'm really getting to know you.
Ooh, I love this. This could start a revolution. Mark, I understand that spirituality has been really important to you. Can you talk about how that's helped you or reflect on any of the things that Tim have said?
Yeah, church groups are an important part of my life. And number one is I don't play the religion game very well. I grew up doing that. And after I got dumped, like I was talking earlier, by the girlfriend, I realized that there's a lot of attachment and love in this world that fails. And there's a really important word in the Hebrew scriptures, and it is carried through into the Christian scriptures. It's the Hebrew word is hesed, and the Christian view or translation is unfailing love or loving kindness. So I started really looking for unfailing love because I realized that attachment and love in this life on a human scale will probably fail me again. It's failure prone. So I really started looking for God, and I found that Jesus is a real person alive. Jesus doesn't play the religious game very well. He didn't in his life in the New Testament. If you read the New Testament, you see how hard he was on religion. And, he got crucified for it. So, but I find that he's real, living, active in my life. And I utilize resources that aid me in my connection with him.
That's good. Joey, you're not at the 50s yet. So do you have any cautionary tales that you're taking from this idea that men in their 50s tend to be kind of lonely? Or do you want to reflect on any of the things that we've been talking about?
With the loneliness thing, I mean, I'm in a very particular situation with my disability, but I've still been able to maintain my connections, luckily, with my older friends, especially because they already know who I am, have this established relationship. I think just within our society, it's hard to keep those deep relationships because everybody's moving around, everybody's really, really, really busy. So it's one of those things that where we have to put a lot of effort into not being lonely, which is, I think, a switch from how society has normally been when you have your people right next to you in the town that you live in, you have your family right there. So these days, I think it's just harder to not be lonely. And so I can see how that's happening. And it's one of those things where we have to kind of switch things up into how we interact with people and how we search connection out.
Yeah, but I think you're smart that you've kept your longtime friends, your friends from a long, from way back. All right, so we're going to go to resources and resources you would like to share. I'm going to start with Mark. Are there resources you'd like to share for men who've been through a tough time or want to grow?
Yeah, a couple of them. One is it's called the Emmanuel Practicum, and it's really the nuts and bolts, the how to make this connection with the Lord Jesus. And it's a very simple book. I read that, read it and reread it, practically trying to memorize a lot of it. Another book I am really reading and rereading a lot. It's entitled Altogether You, and it's about internal family systems vis-a-vis the Christian and really a wider spiritual view, that how we have these parts of ourselves lying within us and you guys in the therapy world know about IFS. So it's an IFS book from a Christian point of view, where they're recognizing that you have a divine spark within you that's there to help you.
All right, let's go to Joey. Joey, what are some resources you'd like to share for men?
A great resource in San Francisco is CIIS, and that was where I first started therapy. They use a sliding scale, so if you don't have a lot of money, it's very, very helpful. And they have a lot of good therapists. Some are interns, but they, of course, see a supervisor, so they're well trained. And it's something that if you don't have insurance, it makes a huge difference.
All right, Tim, are there resources you'd like to share?
Well, I may be biased, but Shine a Light Counseling Center is an amazing resource. It's got affordable counseling. We've got a staff of 60 therapists actually, and I've hand selected all of them, so I know they're good. But there's a lot of variety in them too, and that's important because getting a good fit with your therapist is key. And therapists differ a lot. And if you've had a bad experience with a therapist, or if you've seen some of these awful portrayals of therapy on TV, please know that that is not necessarily how it's like, what it's like. So Shine a Light Counseling Center is available. We've got couples counseling, we've got family counseling, individual counseling, and we are starting a men's group too. So now's the time to contact. It's at shinealight.info, shinealight.info. And we'd love to have you join a men's group with us, or anything else you need help with.
That's something that I've realized after going through a few therapists, is that they're all different. And when you find a good fit, it makes such a huge difference, because you might, especially as a man, if you try therapy your first time and it doesn't work out, you can easily say, well, therapy is not for me. And it really does matter if you find the right person.
Up next, we have an In Your Voice story from Daniel, a community member who began therapy as a teenager. Now, after a decade of experience, he reflects on the lessons he's learned along the way. Here's Daniel.
Hello, my name is Daniel. I am 28 years old, and I have been in therapy since I was 18. I have struggled with depression and anxiety for most of my life, and therapy has helped me tremendously with managing that. Something that I wish I had known about therapy when I had started out is that a major aspect of it would be patience. Patience is a incredible tool if you can manage to harness it when starting therapy, committing to therapy, and committing to therapy in the long term. It takes patience to find the right therapist who is a good fit for you. It takes patience to trust that it's working, and practice to enact what you learn through therapy. But ultimately, the most difficult thing about therapy is that not unlike exercise, you don't always see the results immediately. It takes time and consistency, but you do find a difference over time. A great example for me is I have dealt with suicidal ideation for a lot of my 20s, and it's only within the past several years that I have actually been able to kind of move past that. Not 100%. There are still bad days that come in, and that, like, things like that have been something I've learned to anticipate. But ultimately, thanks to therapy and the things I've learned, the tools I have acquired through it, and the practice I have in my personal life and handling things like this, I'm more equipped to handle things like depression, like anxiety, and suicidal ideation more appropriately. So, if anyone is considering starting therapy, I highly recommend it, but I also highly recommend to just take your time with it, trust yourself, trust your therapist, and give it your best shot. Thanks.
Thank you, Daniel, for sharing your story and insights. You've been listening to State of Mind, being human and living well.
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 A heartfelt thank you to our guest host, Lisa Herendeen, and to our guests, Tim Hartnett, Mark Vanderhoof, and Joey Fino, and to all the men who step into therapy. Your courage is reshaping the culture, strengthening relationships, and paving the way for future generations. And of course, thank you for joining us. New episodes of State of Mind are released the first Sunday of every month and can be found along with our complete archive on our website at stateofmindmedia.org. If you enjoyed today's show, you might also want to check out episode 75, Codependence versus Interdependence in Relationships, episode 52, Healing from Dysfunctional Families with the ACA 12-Step Program, and episode 48, Aging with HIV. If you missed part of today's episode, or maybe you just want to hear it again, you can subscribe to our podcast on all the major platforms. And when you rate and review our podcast, it helps others find it too. So could you please take a moment to do that if you enjoyed this or any of our episodes? Special thanks to Jeannie Baldzikowski and Vijay Luca for audio production, to Yusuf Hassanein for audio production and volunteer coordination, Patrice Vecchione for In Your Voice story coaching, Rantan Hoy and Ronnie Wong for transcriptions, Priscilla Yee for graphic design, Nimalon, Ella Chauvin for marketing, Lisa Herendeen, Heather Franks, and Katrina Tattenham for research, and Leslie Nielsen for community outreach. And a special thank you to musician Adrian Legg and Favored Nations Entertainment for the use of our theme music. State of Mind was developed and originally broadcast in association with KSQD-FM in Santa Cruz, California. We always want to hear from listeners and community members just like you. You can submit your own In Your Voice recording and become part of the conversation, just like Daniel did today. Simply call in or record an audio file right on your phone. Tell us about a mental health experience you've had, something that's contributed to your mental health recovery, or share a resource that's been helpful. We want to hear from you, and your voice may just be featured on a future episode. Submission details can be found at stateofmindmedia.org. Join us again next month for a brand new episode of State of Mind. Until then, live well.